Okay, let's dive right into this. When we look back at the timeline of modern American politics, the year 2026 absolutely stands out as a highly, highly unprecedented era. So, welcome to this explainer. Today we're putting on our historian hats to objectively examine a period marked by just relentless, rapid-fire shifts in policy and public life. We're looking at a time when the sitting president, now in his second and final term, pursued his preoccupations with, well, very minimal dissenting voices around him. And that led to what many have described as a year of non-stop, completely tumultuous change. To really make sense of it all, we've got to look past the sensational headlines and dig directly into the primary sources, the raw data, and of course, the actual voices of the American people on the ground. To truly grasp the sheer chaos of 2026, here is our syllabus for today. First up, an era of broken norms. Second, the polling paradox. Third, a divided nation reacts. And finally, we'll look at the economic undercurrent. Section 1, an era of broken norms, volume and velocity. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about here. When analyzing history, we always have to look at the volume and velocity of change, right? I mean, just consider this timeline of unprecedented domestic and international shocks packed into a remarkably compressed time frame. In a matter of mere weeks, the United States removed Nicolas Maduro from power and explicitly stated it would just run Venezuela. And internationally, the U.S. also began claiming Greenland. But the shocks weren't just overseas. Domestically, a federal agent killed Renee Good in Minneapolis, which sparked some really profound questions about law and order at home. Simultaneously, literally at the exact same time at the highest levels of government, the head of the central bank was placed under investigation, and a journalist's home was raided by the FBI. Normally, any single one of these events would define an entire political year. But here, they're hitting back to back to back, signaling a massive, fundamental shift in American governments and our approach to allies. Which brings us to this quote from our primary sources, and it really just perfectly summarizes the historical weight of the moment. How America acts and how it's governed are changing. Norms are being broken. Because we're in the president's second and final term, and because there are so few dissenting voices actively restraining him right now, he's kind of acting exactly as he pleases. The traditional guardrails and the diplomatic norms that governed previous administrations, they are visibly shifting right before our eyes. Moving on to Section 2, the polling paradox, contradictory data. Now, what's really interesting about this data is that, as a historian, observing the leaders is really only half the equation. The other half is how the public actually reacts to them. And honestly, you'd probably assume there'd be these massive, wild swings in public opinion given all the chaos. Yet, look at these remarkably low approval ratings for the administration's controversial auctions. Only 35% of Americans approved of the U.S. taking over and running Venezuela. Even fewer, just 30%, approved of using federal funds to buy Greenland. And when it came to using military force for these massive overseas ambitions, support completely plummeted to a mere 14%. So the public, by and large, absolutely did not endorse the specific headline-grabbing auctions that defined the start of the year. But here is the central paradox of 2026. 40%. Despite all those incredibly low, issue-specific approval ratings we just looked at, the president's overall approval rating hovered right around 40%. And the key word we have to focus on here is stable. Through all the tumultuous weeks, the dramatic foreign policy shifts, the domestic unrest, that 40% line barely budged. It remained this remarkably stable anchor in a complete sea of political chaos. To actually understand what that 40% means in the grand scheme of things, we really have to contextualize it historically. Well, this overall approval rating is definitely much lower than the historical averages of presidents like, say, Barack Obama or George W. Bush. It's actually virtually identical to Joe Biden's approval rating after his first year, and it's right on par with Donald Trump's own first term. So what does this tell us objectively? Well, it tells us that this stability rests largely on the fact that most Republicans still consistently approve of what they're seeing. The base is completely locked in. They are entirely unaffected by the specific controversies dominating the daily news cycle. Section 3. A divided nation reacts, supporters versus critics. So, to truly understand this rigid 40% approval, we've got to examine the divided mindset of the American public through their own words. Let's start with the perspective of the supporters, captured in this pretty remarkable quote. I'm comfortable with him crossing some lines because sometimes you have to get things done. You have to break an egg to make an omelet, right?
For the supporters making up that stable 40%, these broken norms aren't a bug in the system, they're the feature. They view the president as someone who's boldly defending America. In their eyes, all the critics around the world are just clutching their pearls because they've gotten way too comfortable with America acting as the, quote, pocketbook for the world. To this base, crossing these lines is just a necessary tactic to protect America for Americans. But contrast that with the detractor's point of view. One citizen noted, "As someone who is studying history, to see this blatant act of imperialism, we have been slow to awaken as a nation." On this side of the divide, you hear a really profound sense of exhaustion. People describe feeling disappointed, exasperated, just plain tired. They feel that what we might call a pro-democracy movement has been surprisingly low-key. It really hasn't found its stride yet, mostly because people never truly believed things like this could happen here. But despite that slow start, opponents are stressing that there is a super urgent need to organize and counter a worldview that they believe is ultimately making America less safe and less free.
Okay, let's move to our final section and see how all this builds. Section 4, the economic undercurrent, the true pressure point. While the history books might initially focus on, running Venezuela or FBI raids, as historians, we know we always have to follow the money. And here's the reality of that economic undercurrent. We're looking at two totally competing economic realities happening at the exact same time. On the one hand, the macroeconomic data says, hey, the U.S. economy is actually growing. But on the other hand, the one that really matters to people, down at the cash register, consumer and energy prices are up. Affordability is just squeezing the American public. And when we look at historical political trends, everyday affordability almost always outweighs abstract foreign policy in the minds of the electorate. It's a real game changer. So the crucial point is this. Polling strongly suggests that the actual issues impacting voters' views aren't necessarily the spectacular, wild events dominating the past few weeks. If opinions about the administration are actually going to shift away from that stubborn 40%, it probably won't be because of Greenland or Venezuela. Actually, it will be because Americans believe the president is ignoring the one issue they care about absolutely the most, the economy. The cost of living is the true historical driver of this era's political base. Which leaves us looking ahead to the ultimate test, the upcoming midterm elections. This is going to be the moment Americans officially register their response to this paradox of stable chaos. So I'm going to leave you with this question to chew on. When the votes are finally cast, will it be the daily bruising pressures of affordability, or will it be the monumental weight of broken democratic norms that writes the next chapter of American history? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.